It's called the Gas Station Attendant for a reason.
When he told me he was working at the gas station, I got that familiar feeling in my chest.
Hi, sweetie.
How's it going?
And it's because, I really feel that the work that immigrants do is often just defined by this job. They get the job done. And we are full human beings with full stories. And I wanted to tell that story about what it was like from a very personal point of view.
Just tell me a little bit about your training and how you got to the point of wanting to make films. Was it a background in journalism? Was it a background in film? What kind of brought you to this space?
It's a very winding road. It's not something I ever dreamed I would be doing. I started off in high school as a classical pianist and then was a math major in college, then dropped that and studied religion and computer science and found myself in New York and trying to make a living. And I was doing all kinds of odd jobs, doing graphic design. But I had always loved films and watching films, and I kept thinking about some of the projects I had in college that I thought could be interesting documentaries. And it was actually, I think I was watching POV in the 90s, and I saw some films, and it opened my mind to what documentary could be. I think it was Healthy Baby Girl was one of them. And I think it was Lourdes Portillo's film.
Oh, The Devil Never Sleeps.
Yeah. And I just was like, I want to do that. That's amazing that you could put yourself into these films artistically and set them in a time and space and have that be reflected in the making of the film. And so that's when I sort of got the idea that this is something that I wanted to do. I found myself working at a jewelry company, very well-known jewelry company, known for their certain color of blue. And I was an art director there, and they were just starting to put all their jewelry on websites back then. And a position opened up working as a PA for Bill Moyers, for his production company, making a third of what I was making. And
Jewelry company, Bill Moyers. Yeah.
Yes, it all makes it. It was the best decision I ever made. I never looked back. That company also, though, really made it possible for me and how they ran the company and how Bill structured the whole ecosystem of that place. I had free transportation. I had amazing health care. I had my first 401k as a PA. And I could not have done that unless that company was structured that way and supported people like me, who were just starting out in New York City.
That's amazing that you had the opportunity to work for Bill Moyers. His influence looms so large in public media, and he was one of the architects of public media itself, attacked later by the right for having his show, on the air. What were some of the kind of practices or the things that you picked up working for him in terms of information gathering and fact checking and storytelling?
I mean, I didn't know anything. So a lot of it was just keeping my mouth shut and taking a lot of notes and just watching the people around me, from just how we would go into his office and pitch stories and how he would constantly be poking holes in them. Because I was working for him during that time when we were being attacked, and that's when fact checking was incredibly important and vital. And so we were required to go to these fact checking workshops because if we couldn't afford to be attacked. So a lot of it was, and also he's just an amazing writer. And even the way he speaks, he could turn anything into poetry. And so I would go off and take a writing class because I realized that's the difference between being an associate producer and a producer is being able to write. And I would write scripts on my own, that no one saw. So a lot of it was, to me, it felt very mission driven. Some people would think Bill is, an activist or was practicing advocacy journalism. Being there, it didn't feel like that. It did feel like we had a mission, and that was to bring people to, to show people different sides of a story that they may not be seeing, and back it up with facts.
Did you have a film or films bubbling up inside you? Did you want to make something?
It wasn't actually until, it was years later, and I was working for NewsHour when I decided to make my first film. And I basically took a NewsHour piece and made it into a feature film, which was a fascinating kind of project to do, because you're telling the same story but in two very different formats. I found myself being kind of frustrated and limited by the news format. I was, could only go there for 2 days. I had to make everyone fit into these little sound bite boxes and, into a 10-minute story. And while I was there, I kept thinking, gosh, this would make a really amazing film, to watch one of these houses over time, transform, and watch these neighborhoods transform. And what does that actually mean for the people living in this town?
So was it kind of depth that you were after, like who people are, a little bit, maybe more texture than is possible in that kind of traditional broadcast journalism format?
Yeah, exactly. And getting to know people, watching the seasons change, and so that then I ended up filming there over the course of 3 years.
So when did you begin thinking about, in a kind of serious way, about making your film?
It really was out of the Youngstown film and thinking about home and what that meant to me, and why I was so drawn to these people who did have a home. And during the, right before I started making that film was when my father passed away. So I think it was like, okay, I just finished this film, and I was still kind of grappling with the idea that he was gone. I was still grieving and wondering what it was all for, and remembering that I had these tapes and wanting to hear his voice again. And it just got me thinking, like, oh, this could be, he'd always wanted to do something with his story. Everyone in our family always wanted to do something with his story. So I thought maybe this is the right time. Maybe now I'm old enough, and I just felt ready that I could maybe do something with this. But it was all, so the kind of crux of the film, it grew out of these phone recordings that I had with him.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. First of all, it's a really intimate film, which I think is so hard to do. And I wanted to ask you specifically about those phone call conversations, because it's the kind of spine throughout. It's like it opens the film, it closes the film. How and why were you recording those phone calls with your father?
Yeah, so I recorded them kind of soon after I had moved to New York after college, and he had just started working at a gas station near our home in Texas. And I would call him up just to keep him company.
While he was working nights.
While he was working nights. He was doing the night shift, because I was worried, frankly. And then he had said, like, my stepmom had, like, given him a tape recorder. He was like, oh, maybe I can, like, start recording my story. This is, he had wanted to do this forever, and his story of how he came to the U.S.
So he had his own desire to put down his history and record it somehow.
Yeah. So then I thought, oh, maybe I can help you do this. And I'm sure there was something in the back of my mind that was like, this could be interesting, because he's in a gas station. And so we recorded some of our conversations of him telling me the story of how he came to the U.S. And these were all stories that I had heard a million times growing up. And as a kid, they were fairy tale stories with a happy ending. But when I was listening to them while he was working at a gas station, and then the sound of the cash register, or someone coming to ask for cigarettes or whatever, would kind of just snap me into this reality, realizing, like, oh, it didn't necessarily have the happy ending, the American dream ending that I think he even thought he was going to have. And it just got me in this process of thinking, like, oh, this is just kind of reassessing what it all meant, what his story means. And I had tried to do a few things with those tapes early on and just failed, and I just didn't really have anything to say. At one point, like when I was traveling a lot, I was taking photographs of other South Asian gas station attendants. But I just...
Who were probably like, why are you photographing me?
I was like, oh, maybe it could just be like the conversations in these photographs. Yeah. Like, nothing was really making sense or sticking or clicking.
Did you ever at any point think about making an audio documentary?
Yeah. I tried all kinds of different things, and it just didn't feel like enough, and didn't I just wasn't sure what I was going to say with it, and yeah, so I just put them aside for years and years until after he passed away.
So one of the things, I found the film extremely moving, and it's also really beautifully edited. It's a film, it's always a challenge to make a film that has so much archive, but it's also incredibly rich when done well, I think, as is the case with your film. But I think that's like the double challenge of making a film with personal archive. And I think when you're in the driver's seat as the filmmaker and the editor, or even if you have consultants, and which are key, right? But it's very hard to make those decisions. I know from looking at my own personal footage and having seen many cuts of personal films over the years, that incredibly challenging process of finding the things that are going to tell the story or construct this film. And things have meanings to us personally sometimes that are never going to read to somebody else. And so making those choices, and some filmmakers are very good about, I don't care if people read this, I'm going to do this. And, there's a whole process about that. But how did you begin that process of both organizing the fragments and the materials, and then also begin thinking about shaping this thing?
Well, I definitely knew that the phone calls, as you said, were going to be key and kind of just the backbone of the film. And it's the story of him coming to the U.S. is one of the only chronological things in the film. And I actually love working with archive, especially phone calls. Even the film before this one had phone calls in it, and it's something about like how it collapses time and space in this just really intimate way, where two people in two different locations meet in this totally new universe, and then it's also just so much more intimate than like a Zoom call. And actually, in my previous film, one of my favorite lines in it from a phone call is that one of the people says, "I can hear you smiling," and I just love that. So I knew I was going to do that and create these kind of dream sequences for those phone calls, kind of reminiscing about where my dad was in his life. But a lot of it was throwing out the rules that I had learned from doing news. It was the footage was so messy, and none of it was ever meant to be in a film, shown on a screen. So I kind of had to lean into that. And I did. Lean
into the messiness and into the imperfection of it.
Yeah, and instead of making things logically make sense visually, make it logically make sense emotionally. So some of it was that. And I did try working with an editor early on, and we hired someone, and I just realized that relationship wasn't going to work in that traditional way. She was great at like helping me think creatively about the rules that I was going to give myself. And in fact, all my consultants that I brought on helped me kind of create new rules to organize the footage and to organize the story. But yeah, I just felt like someone was rummaging around my personal belongings, and none of it really made sense to them, and it didn't. It was all created in the edit room, this film.
So you felt like you needed to be doing it because you knew where everything was. And
I needed to play with the footage, and I needed to, I was doing a lot of collage work and writing, and I would just, speak right into the timeline over footage, and it would spark a memory. I mean, the film it's a written piece, really. So I did create these sort of constructs, and one of them was my writing consultant, Mira Jacob, she's also a great friend. She introduced me to this concept of point of telling, which, unlike point of view, point of telling is where you are in relation to the events. Do you know this concept?
No, but it's great. I'm nodding because I wish somebody had told me this sooner. Yeah.
And where you are in relation to the events that you're telling, and how that might shape the style. So the example she gave me was like a car accident. Like, are you telling the story of this car accident right after it happened, so it's frenetic and there's adrenaline, or are you telling it years later and it's a funny anecdote at a dinner party? So I thought a lot about that and what that would mean for how I was going to tell the story. And for me, the point of telling is revealed when I turn the light on. and you see the box of tapes. And then everything you've seen before that in the film is coming out of this sort of state of grief and collaging all of my life and my experience. I mean, there's sort of like these reported sections because that's kind of the journalism that I have in there, but also like I've had kids and you know, I like to write a lot, and so like it feels like a journal or a visual diary up until that point. And there's music and scoring through that whole section, and from that point on, when the light turns on, there's no music, and we're in present day, and everything from that point on is something that I shot for the film until the very, very end. So there were things like that that I did to help me kind of give myself some new rules to work with this kind of material.
I was struck by this, some of the footage you have of your sister or you, and the newness of a camera. There's a small sequence in the film where I think you hit the fade button by mistake, and the camera fades out, and you don't know how to get the fade back. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about it now, where recording is ever present, and we're constantly recording ourselves or being recorded, or your children are, all the time. It's funny to think of that technology being so new and being such a part of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I have like every technology from Super 8 to my iPhone clips are in this film, and I loved intercutting all of it. Yeah, that was really fun.
It has a unity to it. It's a very meditative film and a very personal film. I always think about Tarnation, those films
definitely
that are
an inspiration.
Yeah, remarkable.
Also Texan, so.
Oh. Like this assemblage of things. So you set some rules for yourself as you're putting this together, because the film is so written and constructed in the edit. Tell me a little bit about that process and when you felt like you were beginning to make kind of headway with the cut.
I mean, it started off making sketches. And they almost felt like little complete pieces, which made it more challenging to kind of create more of an arc. Although I would say, like, if you look at sort of the emotional arc of the film, it's pretty traditional, I think, like in terms of like a 3-act structure. But I think, I mean, it was also just getting the funding, though. It was like, had to meet these deadlines, which was very motivating.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was.
So you were working in pieces and like sequences and chunks, and then, I mean, were you doing that thing where you put up the structure on the board and you were looking at individual scenes or the overall structure?
I tried, and we did have like a mural board at one point, and then I just threw it. I was like, this isn't really helping me, and maybe because it was so much in my mind already. I did have like a Google document with like and that was actually more helpful to me, just to have like these outlined chunks, because it was so written. So I would have like chunks of narration in there, and things that I would write, or just thoughts that I would have. But I think like I always knew where I wanted the film to land. I had this idea of where I wanted it to go.
Even in the early stages?
No, it was probably halfway through. So, spoiler alert. The film ends with me playing this piece at a church in Hot Springs. And that was something that the idea came to me because every time we would go back to Hot Springs, which is where my dad lived the last few years of his life, my family would go there on vacation, and we'd always go to the church, to the columbarium where his ashes are, when the church was closed, like when it wasn't, it wasn't during service. And we would have the entire church to ourselves. And my siblings and I would just kind of spread out in the pews. And then often I would play the piano, like Amazing Grace was my dad's favorite hymn, and we would play hymns and sing. And it just became this kind of ritual every time he went there. And so I had that idea of going back there for this piece, for this film, and trying to figure out how to, I mean, his name means make peace. So I knew I wanted to get to that point in the film and kind of make sense of, I mean, the whole film is about me trying to make sense of his life through my life, and creating these contrasts through his life and how where I am, living in the States with my family.
So in terms of the point of telling, you're a parent telling a story about how you were parented.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I used my younger son at the time, who was 10, which was the same age my father was when he ran away, also as a way to kind of show them, that they're inheriting these stories, like within their bodies, the fact that they exist, whereas because of these decisions that our parents make, and generations before that, there's some like crazy number about how many people it takes to make one. Do you know that number? But
I think I've seen that. I was really struck by your father's immigration story is so particular and so unique that through through his charm while working in a hotel, he's sponsored by a Houston couple, kind of, who know him in a very short amount of time and bring him to the United States, and how that. How these moments can just redirect an entire life and a whole like bloodline, right? Just these like events. My father was born in Mexico, and an American photographer had a similar thing with my father, where she was an older woman and she was charmed by him and his music. She sponsored him to come to the United States. So similarly, like I think about that. I don't know. I was thinking about that when in watching your film. Like I exist, and my child exists because of this random act of generosity or noblesse oblige, or maybe cultural arrogance. Who knows? Whatever the reasons are that these things happen, but they end up shifting your whole life. So I thought that was a kind of unique moment in your film. In terms of the reporting, when you're reporting something like that out, it's a deeply personal film, but you're also reporting some of that out. You have the letter, the sponsor letter in the film, right? How are you approaching some of those research things? Did you want to dig deep into that, or did you have the sense of, I just need to know enough to kind of tell my story?
For those sections in particular, I only relied on my father's voice. And what he told me. And sometimes people will say, but I thought this or that. And I was like, well, I'm only going to include what he told me on those phone calls, because it's, that's what I have. So I treated it like a text almost, as a, first person source. And then the other things that were more reported were like trying to sort of more the essay sections of the film, like finding out about my neighborhood. I didn't know anything about Missouri City, where I grew up, until I started making this film. I didn't know it was founded in the 1890s and the whole genial sunshine thing. And it just got me thinking about, like, what does growing up in Texas mean to me? What are the things that I think about that are so Texan that I don't feel like I experience here living in New York now, which is like Friday Night Football and lots of NASA imagery, right. So those, I think, were more or like when I, talk about the convenience store clerk, Ashok Bhattarai, who was murdered. I went down a long research hole, with that, and finding out that like he was in the national news in Nepal when he was killed. Like that was incredible to me. That
archive is very compelling. You have some, it's disturbing in retrospect. That footage of him dancing. You see him full of life as we're learning that he was murdered, and then you see that impact in his home country.
We found some of his friends in Nepal who sent us that birthday footage of him, and then found the news clips of the reporting of his death, and that, I don't know, that was one of those points in the story actually where Francisco Bello, who's was one of the my editing supervisor or consultants, I can't remember what his official title is, but that was a section that like it could easily be lifted out of the piece, but it felt so important to me, this including his story. It happened right around the corner from me, and he seems so much like my dad. And I remember we were struggling with it, like, why do you he kept asking me, like, it's not set up right, like, it just feels like it's an extra piece. And then eventually he was like, this seems really important to you. because you won't take it out. Let's figure this out and how we can kind of make it work. And I was like, this is, I mean, it was, I loved that he said.
I did want to talk about the support for the film. So as you're putting the film together, you know, who were you reaching out to, and how did you begin the process of fundraising?
So for my first film, I really tried to get ITBS funding and applied 8 times. And
For the
never got it.
Youngstown
For the
film.
Youngstown film.
Okay.
Never got it.
So you went through
Although-
that whole open call process.
Many, many times.
Yeah.
Which actually I have to say was helpful because when you write grants, it helps you sort of clarify what your story is.
And did you get feedback? Did you request feedback from those open call sessions?
I think so.
Okay.
I can't remember. But yeah, we did some more interesting kind of funding. Like, you know, we would get people to sponsor shoots, and we had to think really creatively of how to fund that film.
Did you do like a GoFundMe, or I mean, did crowdsourcing for that?
I never wanted to do a GoFundMe or crowd just because they're a lot of work. So we did a lot of asking, like courting, you know, private donations and making it exciting. Like, so we kind of figured out how much one shoot would cost and have, you know, sponsor this one shoot, and have it be more tangible in that way. And then we would sort of, so we did things like that, or like have the fundraising parties, which I don't know. They're very hard to do.
And did you have a fiscal sponsor?
We did.
Okay.
So for all my work so far, it's been Women Make Movies, and they've been amazing.
So that way, when you're getting donations, it's all tax deductible for the
Exactly.
donors, and so that's I guess an added enticement or helpful. Right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so that was the main. We did get a couple of small grants, like from NISCA, New York State Council of the Arts, and a couple of foundations. But a lot of it was private foundations and not paying ourselves.
Right.
too.
Right. So you're working to make a living while you were doing the Youngstown film.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm curious with your film with the attendant. When you're raising money, did you find it harder to raise money for such a personal film, or was it different because you already had a film under your belt? I mean, how did that?
think it definitely helped that I had a film under my belt, and that was also why I was willing to not pay myself with my first film, because I knew that would help. If I could get this done, then, you know, it's a calling card. It shows that I can actually do this. So I wasn't really sure how it was going to be for a personal film, because the style I knew was going to be so different than anything I had done before. My first film was a verite film. My second was more of a traditional film. So I wasn't really sure. And this is one of the things where it was, I think, timing and luck. And, you know, I applied once with a sketch for this film and to ITVS and got it on the first try. And I literally thought David Eisenberg was calling me to tell me I didn't get it, which is crazy. And I just felt like I had won the lottery. Like I could not believe that they were paying me to make this weird personal film. I didn't even know what the ending was going to be. I didn't know any, you know, I had so little. But I think the timing of it and the concept of it, I think it just resonated in the time that we were in.
And also the added, I mean, I do think it really matters when you had completed a whole other film, and at this point you're making a kind of leap, and I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that anyone who's on that funding panel is aware of that. I do think that changes things when you've had demonstrated some ability to do a thing.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true, so that was a big chunk of the money, and they're co-producers. And then the William Graves Production Fund had just come. It was brand new, and I applied
through
to
Firelight.
that. Also through Firelight, and also geared towards a PBS broadcast. And then I got that on. You know, I was part of the inaugural cohort, and it was amazing. I mean, it was such a vastly different experience than my first film.
You had mentioned there was another funder, a reporting journalism funder. Tell me about that funder.
The Economic Hardship Reporting Project, which they're an amazing organization. It's Barbara Ehrenreich is the founder of it, and now Alyssa Court is running it since her passing. And they're all about funding people telling their own stories, people who are in precarious situations or writing about, economic class or issues. They want people from the inside who are actually experiencing those things, writing and reporting their own stories. And I had done work for them before. So again, it's like showing that you can actually do the work. And I had worked on a series with The Intercept and them. So I had approached her about this film. And this is usually they do like journalism.
Yeah.
And this is a very different kind of project. But it's called The Gas Station Attendant for a reason. And it's because, I really feel that the work that immigrants do is often just defined by this job. They get the job done. And we are full human beings with full stories. And I wanted to tell that story about what it was like from a very personal point of view. And I think that's one of the reasons why they signed on.
They supported.
They supported the film.
I mean, to me, that's exciting when journalism funders are willing to take these kinds of risks. I think there's a very tiresome conversation about documentary with like, is it journalism? Is it art? And there's some. I think there's some legacy models that really don't serve makers, and I think it's always exciting when someone is doing a piece there's some reporting, things are reported out, or you're connecting it to a bigger story, and yet it's an artful or independent, or a personal approach. And those two things, have never been in conflict. It just feels like this artificial, this binary or this like silly debate that happens. And I think sometimes it can be territorial too. I think some of the legacy, I can't imagine now why they want to continue to do that, but some of the legacy entities around journalism feel like they need to define how journalism is presented. But one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from this veteran filmmaker, John Else, who was, he was an advisor. I went early on to the Sundance Labs with my first feature documentary, Reportero, which is about journalists covering organized crime in Mexico. And I was working with Karla Gutierrez, a really remarkable editor. But it was an early film for all of us. I mean, we were all kind of just getting started. We brought this rough cut to the film, to the Sundance Labs, and it was kind of like long and just like any kind of somewhere between an assembly and a rough cut. And John Else looked at it and he said, you need to make a version of this film that Frontline would hire you to do. He said, don't worry about, he said, just get all of the facts right, tell the story, figure out the chronology of it. He's like, then let it go. Don't think about it for a couple of weeks, and then come back and make the film that Frontline would fire you for being too lyrical and poetic. That we basically followed that advice. We did this kind of radio cut where for ourselves figured it out, like the equivalent of an outline, and then one made a film that was completely did its own thing. But I remember I loved that advice because the facts were right. The chronology, we fully understood it after some digging deeper. But then we turned it into the film that we wanted to make anyway. So anyway, I always think that debate about what is journalism and independent documentary, that there has been some silliness about like territoriality and who does what, it feels like a little bit silly.
And some of it is towards the same end. I mean, about creating understanding and empathy. And so I think they're accomplishing very similar goals.
Yeah. So you screened the film in Hot Springs where he was a member of the church. What was the reaction in Hot Springs?
That was, every screening has been so different and interesting. So he lived the last years of his life in Hot Springs. My parents moved there because it's just a lot cheaper to retire in Arkansas. And he joined the church that was literally like a block away from where this festival is held at the Arlington. And so actually every festival that I go to I always research the community and do outreach and, or any organizations that might find it interesting, students, writers groups, immigrant groups. But for Hot Springs, it was the church. So I reached out to them, and it's where, as I say in my film, my dad found community there. I am not religious anymore, but I really see the value in having a church community. I mean, when he was sick, they would come, and they're incredibly supportive of him and of my family. And and the festival was so kind. They gave a discount code to everyone from the church that was printed in the bulletin, and it was amazing to be in that room with them, and terrifying too, because I'm not revealing all positive information about my dad. It's very personal. These are some of the things that they didn't even know about him. And I also convinced my stepmother, to come up as well. But to see that room filled with, especially local folks who may not have, some of them had never even been to the festival, it was amazing. It was really amazing. And there was so much warmth and love in that room. I mean, I got so many laughs compared to other screenings. It was an amazing experience. Very emotional, but it was great.
I can imagine. There's a lot of discussion now about the need for more of these in-person screenings. I mean, in this case, you're bringing a film to a community that your father was connected to. I think in general, there's this discussion about, in this era of screens and post-pandemic, that there seems to be movement on doing more of these kind of in-person screenings. I mean, do you like touring with the film and doing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my first film was released during the pandemic, so I didn't get to go to any festivals. We got into a bunch, but I never got that feeling.
Yeah.
And it just makes such a difference when you're with people. I mean, it reminded me why I love going to the movies, and seeing a movie with a group of people is so different than seeing it on a little screen in your room. And it's just been really interesting, people's reactions to the film too, and seeing that they all find themselves, not even someone who comes from an immigrant background. They start thinking about their complicated relationship with their parent. I mean, and that is one of the goals of my film. I mean, so the last piece that I play in the film is called Unsent Love Letters, and it's written by this composer, Elena Katz-Chernin, and she wrote them as an homage to Eric Satie, who's a French composer, because when they went into his apartment after he died in Paris, they found a stack of love letters that he had never sent. And that is what my film is about. It's about sending those letters while you can, saying the things, asking the questions, telling those people that you love them while you have the chance. And so it's been great to see people connect to that in their own lives. So I hope we get to continue creating more spaces to see films together, and maybe not in theaters, but maybe creating, I don't know, I just feel like there needs to be more room, and a better financial model to make that happen too.
I think you do such a good job of drawing. I mean, for someone who didn't know your father, you get a very an empathetic and kind of a full-fleshed kind of vision of him, and I think understanding about his childhood experience, the uprooting, and having to fend for oneself, and the things that happen afterwards, how that's all connected in a life.
One of the structures that I had is that each of the dream sequences, which are my dad telling his story about how he came here, they're sort of prompted by a question. So there's a little bit of a call and response. And so, for instance, I asked the question, why was he so restless? Because my dad just constantly was moving from job to job. And it's answered by a dream sequence where he's recalling when he ran away from home and how he had to survive on the streets. And it was a real question in my mind that I discovered an answer, may not be the answer, while I was making the film, that it was survival. To survive on the streets in India as a 10-year-old, he had to constantly be moving from place to place and constantly was trying to find the better job. And that just became embedded in who he was and how he lived his life in the States. A lot of those sections were kind of me trying to understand, posing these questions about who my dad was and then answering them with his experience in India.
As far as you know, has the defunding of public media impacted your distribution or your plans?
it is something that, you know, we've seen now, the closing of World and America Reframed, and that was like where my first film went. That was just heartbreaking to see yet another strand no longer exists. So I know it's having some kind of effect. I mean, there's just not as many outlets out there in the public media landscape, and it's devastating to see, because those were the films that inspired me, were the ones that I saw on PBS to do this work. And I'm like, gosh, why did I wait so long to start making films and get this funding? But that's where we are today.
And what about the broader documentary landscape?
I just feel like it's falling on us to come up with these creative solutions, and, you know, reassessing what success means, and how many times people ask me what my goals are and what would make you happy. What's the minimum that'll make you happy? What kind of screening? And I think those are all necessary and great conversations to have. And maybe I'm being a little like, I don't know, jaded, or I don't know. But I think something good can come out of this. But I'm also like, this whole scarcity mindset is just really annoying to me. I mean, there's so much money out there, and it's really frustrating to figure out how we can tap that, and maybe it's not through the public media, you know, landscape for now. I mean, now that it's gone, parts of it, the funding mechanisms are being impacted. It's hard to imagine them coming back. It's always harder to bring those things back once they've been taken away. But it happened at one point. I mean, ITVS was created, and I hope that, and CPB was created. You know, I hope we can come to a place again where, there's just more equitable distribution for funding films like this film that I made would never have been funded in a commercial way. And so I'm so grateful that I was able to make this film while I had the chance to.